I'm Jonathan Horn.
I'm Cody Atkinson.
And I'm Matteo Schlapik-Savillo, and this is the 110 Percenters podcast. This week, we discuss Geelong's negotiation of a secret concussion waiver, talk about Cody's trip to Manuka to watch the latest instalment of the Expansion Cup, and shoot from the hip. Hello and welcome to 110 Percenters, the footy podcast. My name is Matteo Schlapik-Savillo and I write the 1 Percenters newsletter. I'm joined by Cody Atkinson of the ABC. Cody, how are you, mate?
I'm doing great today, Matteo. It was a beautiful day in the nation's capital. Went out for a walk on the nature ridge behind our house and dreamt of nothing but footy. How have you been?
It's so funny, Cody, that you mentioned that you dreamt of nothing but footy. I'm going to save the full explanation of this story for a later segment in today's show. You actually featured in my dream last night.
Okay.
In a totally sort of family friendly podcast compliant way. Yes, I hadn't told you that before we started recording, so I did spring that on you a little bit. But look out for that later in the show, listeners. Mateo's dream that featured. I'm not going to say it was about you; it featured you.
I'm good with that. As long as there's no sealed sections required for the podcast,
Correct.
I'm all good.
And the fascinating thing is how beautifully it ties into our second segment on today's show. I'm really well, thanks for asking. We had a scheduled power outage at home today, and I learned that our the battery backup that we have on our solar system didn't work quite the way I wanted to, but that is all right. It's a lesson learned for next time, because we haven't had quite the sun here in Melbourne that you apparently have in Canberra for the last few days, but that's all right.
We get a lot of sun. It's just like 3 hours a day. It's so much sun for those 3 hours, though.
Well, and winter sun can be so deceptive, right? Because those are often the coldest days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. And in what feels like it's increasingly a weekly cat update, we did have to take Heathcliff to the vet this morning, but don't worry, listeners, he's fine. He's just croaky. He's got a sore throat or laryngitis or something, so
I think the biggest regret is I didn't do a sting for your cat updates each week. I feel like I should be producing something. If anyone wants to hear what I can do, you know what? I'm going to put a song in about cats before Matteo talks about cats.
I love
Let's
that.
see how that
Thank you,
goes.
Cody. And one of the reasons I think why I am kind of eager for the end of the men's season is that it will allow us to sort of, I guess, retool and think about the podcast and what we want the podcast to sound like next year and in the future. And I think, cat-related stings might be a part of that. We're also, of course, joined by Jonathan. Wait, no, Jonathan's not here. He's working on his tan in Bali, of course. So it is just Cody and I this week on the show. We're talking about round 22 of the AFL, which is also the beginning of the AFLW season for 2026. Really exciting. All the way back on Thursday night, North Melbourne recorded maybe its most impressive victory of the Alistair Clarkson era, defeating the Dogs by 23 points at Marvel. The next evening, Brisbane flexed its muscles by thrashing the Hawks to the tune of 67 points. On Saturday, Melbourne vanquished Freo in an incredible game at the G. I think probably the game of the season so far. Sydney annihilated Port in that 4:30 twilight time slot. Geelong beat Essendon without raising a sweat. And Adelaide needed some Isaac Rankin magic and maybe some generous late umpiring calls to beat a pretty dogged and determined Richmond side on Saturday night. On Sunday, the Gold Coast Suns did something they hadn't done since May, win a game of footy. They squeaked past the Giants by a couple of points in the Expansion Cup. Collingwood beat a spirited West Coast, and in the first game of the Sunday doubleheader, Carlton withstood a fight back by spirited St Kilda in the AFLW season opener in front of a crowd of more than 20,000. While in the men's game later that evening, the Blues were far too good for a Saints side who lost Nazai Wangadeen Miller to a hamstring injury within the first 5 minutes. and couldn't really fire a shot after that. So with that result, the top 10 looks set with 2 games still left in the home and away season. But Cody, listeners, we're going to start off the field and in the only place we can, which is that last Thursday. So what's that? I think 4 days ago as we record. Jay Clark of the Herald Sun, chief football reporter, broke the story that a Victorian AFL club had negotiated a waiver with one of its players to mitigate its legal exposure in the event of that player suffering further concussion-related injuries. That club was later revealed to be Geelong, and the player, the defender, Jake Kolodjasny. It's safe to say that a lot has happened since then. We're going to go through the timeline of the events as we know them, with the caveat that this is a really fast-moving story. By the time this episode comes out, perhaps some of the facts or the emphasis of this story might have changed a little bit. Cody, can you take us away, please?
With pleasure, Matteo. And we're going to be alternating days here, so you don't listen to one of us talk endlessly on and on and on and on. Yeah, that was a good narrative device. So on Thursday, the 6th of August, Jay Clark broke the story without naming the player, reporting it a player at a Victorian AFL club, after having been cleared by the AFL's concussion panel, signed a document acknowledging the potential risk of continuing his career. Clark identified the player as being re-signing in 2024 as being a veteran player currently out of the side, who had suffered concussion injuries in the past. We'll loop back to that bit later. The club was identified as Geelong later that day by another journalist, and that part's also quite important. That night, the AFL and AFLPA issued a joint statement. Geelong conceded the waiver, quote, went further than intended, unquote, and said it would remove the waiver, while confirming neither the AFL nor AFLPA were made aware of the document. No sanction was announced at that point. AFL Commission Chair Craig Drummond, who was Geelong's president when the deal was struck, issued a brief statement calling concussion, quote, a challenging medical and legal issue for all contact sports globally, unquote.
That takes us to Friday, August 7th. Geelong CEO Steve Hocking fronted the media saying, quote, I take responsibility for the fact that we didn't lodge it being the contract variation, with the AFL and AFLPA, end quote, and revealed that Geelong had received a formal please explain letter from the AFL. That evening, Jake Kolodjasny ended speculation by issuing a statement through the club identifying himself as the player, saying he participated fully in the AFL's independent concussion panel process, respected its independence, and was comfortable with the outcome, while also expressing disappointment that his private medical information had become public.
That takes us to Saturday, the 8th of August. AFL CEO Andrew Dillon spoke publicly on the issue for the first time as the AFL confirmed a full investigation was being undertaken.
He sure did speak publicly on the issue, Cody. Monday, the 10th of August, so yesterday as we record, the AFL sent out a memo to clubs regarding the situation. Channel 7 AFL reporter Mitch Cleary reported that the AFL had acknowledged on Saturday that they'd been, quote, involved in conversations around the acknowledgement of Kolodjasny's risk to keep playing, but the league insists it didn't see or have the final agreement lodged by Geelong, end quote. That again is really salient to all of this. Also on Monday, Geelong's board held a crisis meeting. President Grant McCabe stated that, quote, we acknowledge this has been a challenging time for Jake, our club and Geelong supporters, end quote, and confirmed that the club's formal reply to the AFL would be submitted by the end of Tuesday. Club captain Patrick Dangerfield publicly backed Hocking while conceding fault, telling the media, quote, clearly there were some parts that we buggered up as a club and we can be better, end quote. Drummond, who, remember, is now the AFL Commission Chair, was Geelong's president at the time this contract variation was negotiated and not lodged, separately issued an apology and stated he will not be involved in the AFL's assessment of the matter. Footy journo Tom Morris added further detail the document it was based on. Wording was, quote, a direct replica of the approved clause used for another player's return to football through a state league in 2021, end quote, and that Geelong club doctor David Long has separately advised Kolodjasny in early 2024 to consider ceasing contact sport. It's really important to note that that second player who returned to football through a state league has not been publicly named, and we are going to keep it that way.
That takes us to today, and there's still a lot happening. So if there's something that we've missed, and today we are recording on Tuesday, the 11th of August, if something we've missed in the last 24 hours, that's because we're not time travelers. Uh, Geelong was finalising its formal response to the AFL's Please Explain notice due by the end of today. I'm not aware of that as we go to air. No outcome, sanction, or further statement from the AFL has been reported as of this afternoon. And we can also report that Jake Kolodjasny has been held out from selection at AFL and VFL levels this weekend, and the club is continuing to support the player.
Yep. So, okay, that's those are the facts out of the way, Cody. Let's get into the conjecture, the non-defamatory conjecture, of course. No, I'm sorry, I'm trying to introduce a little bit of levity to what's a really serious discussion. I want to hear about your reaction to this story when it broke on Thursday.
Yeah, it was. I think I was still awake. My bedtimes. I think I've mentioned on this podcast before. My bedtimes tend to be around 9 a.m. So I was scrolling Twitter and I saw the alert for the story. I think I was still up and I thought, wow, okay, this is a big one. And it was phenomenal reporting by Jay Clark. That wasn't my reaction. My reaction was that seems like it's pretty clear breach of the AFL rules. As long-time listeners to the podcast know, I sleep next to a copy of the AFL rules. I do read the AFL critical documents pretty regularly. If you've read my writing, I do refer to them. Sean and I refer to them somewhat frequently. All the key policy documents, the rules, the regulations, laws of the game, and the CBA. It's good to stay on top of all these things. Clark really importantly highlighted which rule he thought the breach was. Rule 4.3, which is lack of notification or registration of agreements, and it seems prima facie to take a wanker legal term into it. A breach there. You could also argue conduct unbecoming the catch-all 2.3, rule 2.3.
Sure.
But it felt like it was a big deal. Maybe not as big as Eston doping, but certainly bigger than Geelong's poor bookkeeping fine that they'd suffered in the past. Certainly bigger than some of the other scandals. I think it's probably bigger than the Kurt Tippett stuff. Certainly bigger than Sydney training ban. Like, it felt pretty significant. So I was expecting a lot to come of it. And it felt like then, and it feels like now there's still so much more to come in the story that we're going to hear. But it felt like there was at least grounds for a significant investigation when I first read the story into what had happened and the details around it, because it felt very clear at the time that there was at least merit worthy of investigation. Matteo, what was your take straight away?
So, Cody, I think one of the most important lessons I think I've learned since starting the newsletter is just the extent to which clubs sort of are ruthlessly self-interested. You speak to and know more people in clubland than I do. I've had the good fortune to speak to some people like that, and well, we both know there are lots of smart people who spend actually quite a lot of time thinking about. I think gaming the rules would be an exaggeration, but they think about ways to eke out advantages for their own club.
Maximize their benefits, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it, right? And I think, I mean, so they should. That is what they are employed to do, is to obviously further the interests of their employer. And so, in a way, it's not surprising, but I think that explains a lot of these types of off-field stories is a club pushing the envelope in a way that feels unprecedented. I think still, even given that I was really surprised when I heard about it, I wasn't necessarily surprised to learn of the identity of the club being Geelong, because I think, again, without waiting, it's a kind of brackish and turbulent waters here in terms of what we can say. Clearly, I think Geelong pushed the envelope a little bit in terms of some of the stuff they do, that's what's been reported. And so I think, to me, it felt, my initial reaction was one of that a kind of moral firewall had been breached a little bit. I think that concussion-related injury just feels so central to our discussions about the future of the game. And this actually felt not only like the weakening of what I think clearly existed as a sort of maybe de facto moral precedent in maybe the minds of a lot of people who follow the game, which is that it is really serious, and the league talks about taking it seriously. Players take it seriously. The Players Association take it seriously, and we sort of operate under the assumption that clubs take it seriously. But clubs take concussions seriously. That also means that they take their, I guess, their legal exposure to concussion-related injury really seriously as well. And so I think thinking through the implications of that, it sort of maybe when the news settled with me, it became a little bit less surprising, but it did feel like quite a bombshell when it broke. So credit to Jay for breaking this story. It's a really important scoop, I think.
Yeah, I think it's there's a lot of, I mean, I saw a couple of people say it's quite clearly the footy story the year. It's when we think about it, and we've talked about it on this show in the past, there's been quite a lot that's come in this player safety injury space this year. We've had the great reporting by Four Corners. We've had other things about the concussion training limits. We've had a lot of discussion about what the game should look like and how we make the game safer for players. And this piece of reporting by Clark fits within that tapestry really neatly. And it still feels like we're dancing around the outside of what needs to be probably pretty serious reform into the policy drivers around the game, and what makes the game great, and can we make the game great and safe at the same time.
It feels to me, Cody, like there's a tension at the heart of this that without formal codification and articulation of an approach by the AFL, hopefully in collaboration with the AFL Players Association, is going to be pretty irresolvable, which is that footy players want to play footy. And some of them are willing to make decisions that might ultimately, I suppose, be adversarial to their long-term health, but they decide to wear that risk, or they feel as though they can't make another choice, I suppose, but to assume that risk in order to extend their career, which of course is a lucrative occupation, but it's also the thing that has defined their lives, right? And I think that really governs the thinking of a lot of footy players. It's what they do. It's probably how a lot of their self-identity is formed. And so, but at the same time, you can't contract out your rights as an employee. I think it seems salient to me that Geelong sort of negotiated this a little bit under cover of night. There's obviously been the revelation of there being a prior contract variation for a player returning to footy through a state league. But look, I certainly don't think Geelong were intending to tell anyone about this had the story not been broken publicly. And so it just makes me think, so I suppose loop back to what I was saying a little earlier about clubs being driven by self-interest. Look, now that we know about this earlier contract variation, and we know that was lodged with the AFL and the AFLPA in 2021, the league has known of the existence of this as a live issue, the specific fact of some clubs seeking to vary individual player contracts to mitigate their own legal exposure to concussion. The AFL has known about this as an issue for 5 years, and well, I haven't seen any public communication or codification of an approach to dealing with this really important player welfare and worker rights issue, which feels like a disappointing failure of governance to me, Cody.
Well, I think it goes a step further. It's the state league example it's a different one because it's not covered by
Yep.
state league players aren't covered by the CBA. So it's a different kettle of fish here. They're not covered by AFLPA representation inherently. It's my understanding. So they without getting into workers' rights, industrial rights, I think it's such a different scenario that it really put it off to one side. AFL CBA is real clear on the obligations on clubs for players' health and safety, and the standard playing contracts for those who have looked at them are very clear as to its languages, specifically around the ensuring a player's health or safety. Um, the AFL memo came out really strong, and this is the line from the AFL memo that Andrew Dillon sent out. Any arrangement that may affect the protections connected to a player's health or safety in a way that is inconsistent with the relevant terms of the CBA will not be approved by the AFL and the AFLPA, unquote. And the other line that's pertinent, in my view, is, quote, any arrangement entered into without the required approval will be treated as ineffective or unenforceable and may also give rise to sanction under the AFL rules, unquote. And there's lines and language around that the AFL and AFLPA have to approve in advance any such waivers. I think for me, that's pretty clear that at the AFL level that they hadn't considered it, and in fact to the point where they wouldn't have improved it in that terms. That's how I read it. That may not be correct. They may have waved it through. It's interesting to point out that it's extremely different operations staff that were in charge of the AFL in 2021 as that they were in 2024. And I think that's a critical point. In 2021, for at least some of that time, the general manager of footy, executive general manager of football was Stephen Hawking, who's now at Geelong. And the current executive general manager and then executive general manager went in the same job. Our friend Swanee, who's a ripper bloke, is the current EGM. So it's a different administration. It was a different head of the AFL then. Dylan wasn't in that job. The situation then to the situation now, and there was different concussion experts that were advising the AFL. So I think enough has changed on its merits that while you could have taken some of the 2021 scenario to apply it to 2024, I think it's a pretty radically different environment. It was a different CBA too, I think. It's not even the same CBA. That was refreshed after that. So every minute it feels like it's changing, and some of the facts it gets harder and harder to delineate. Matteo?
Well, it's a difficult thing to apprehend, but I think it would be a mistake to use. And look, let's be clear, Cody, you're a bright guy. I think I have my moments as well. We are not workplace lawyers. That's not our training. So we need to make sure to not go too far out ahead of our skis on this. We are a footy podcast, not a labour rights podcast. I think the apparent complexity of the issue can maybe have the net effect of making people feel a little complacent about it, or as though, oh, well, this is actually tricky. I don't know how to apportion blame or how to feel about this issue. I do think that would be, I'm not suggesting that's a deliberate strategy by any party involved here necessarily, but I think that would be a mistake. I think it's really important to sort of, again, in a careful way, for us to probably highlight highlight the role of Craig Drummond being a party to, I suppose, both sides of this, having obviously been a very senior figure at Geelong when this contract variation for Jake Kolodjasny was made, and now, of course, being the AFL Commission chair. But maybe more specifically, and you've sort of alluded to it when you spoke about our friend and Ripper Bloke, Greg Swan, there's this sort of revolving door that's happened now, that has been happening for quite some time between the top brass at clubs and senior figures in the AFL. And that's not inherently a problem. And I think, the AFL has been reasonably public about stating that it kind of wants to improve relations with club, make sure there's a really healthy line of communication between clubs. But I think there will always be people in the AFL and at clubs that know a lot of things, and that's, that makes them good at their job, and it makes them desirable to be hired in senior roles, etc. But it creates these conflicts or perceptions of conflict of interest when they then sort of go over to the other side, I suppose. So I think I do wonder if one of the stories here, behind the story, Cody, is this small group of really influential club and league officials who maybe had gotten used to, I suppose, getting what they wanted, or knowing how to attain or achieve the objectives that their employer wanted, and they were used to doing that maybe out of the public limelight. So, yeah, I mean, again, I suppose it just speaks to the need for investigative journalism, right? Because otherwise, we wouldn't be speaking about this because we wouldn't know that this had happened.
Yeah, I think the reporting needs to stay vigilant, and I think all sporting leagues like to keep their dirty laundry behind closed doors until they've got a read on it and they can handle it. So I'm a pretty big basketball fan. The Kawhi Leonard situation has been going on for 11 months over there, and they still haven't announced the sanction. In fact, there's been a second illegal deal that's been acknowledged within the last couple of days. So
isn't it a third? Sorry.
Could be a third. Oh, because you've got the Rhode Island soccer team, is it?
Yes.
And then you've got the scoreboard deal, the Halo board or whatever.
The scoreboard deal was so mind-blowing to me. I mean, American capitalism...
Did you see the tree on top of it?
I didn't see the tree on top of it. That's
what
an incredible detail.
They planted an aspiration tree on top of the scoreboard when they lifted it up, and that's the only sighting of Kawhi Leonard and a tree in the same shot and the Clippers. It's great. Pablo, shout out to Pablo. I know he's a long-term listener, over the 110%ers. So, like, I think you're doing good work. One day you could reach the heights that we're at. No, Pablo does great stuff. I think the most important thing here is, I guess it's a lesson that Pablo has learnt, in that there's always more to the story and there's always more that can be uncovered. I could speculate on what's going to happen from here and who's at fault and how the AFL's waiver from another club got to Geelong and how they got to use it. I think there's a lot of smart people out there that can make a few reasonable guesses to who the second player is and what their career ended up being or is continuing to be. I'm not going to get into that. I think the more important thing here is to realize that there's a lot that's going to come out organically, and I think the most important part is having a fourth estate that's enabled by the AFL and the media landscape in Australia, a diverse media landscape who's able to do that investigative reporting to bring light to those issues. And yeah, hats off to Jay and his work. I think the unfortunate thing for me is that there's been drip feeding of information because the original report was so strong. So Jake, I don't think would have revealed his identity had Geelong not been named that early.
Yep.
And I think that's a bit unfortunate. And Jake's not the only one who fit the criteria that Jay initially went with.
Yeah, I think Jay did quite a good and careful job of I suppose attempting to de-identify or keep the player's identity anonymous.
And even when Geelong got revealed, there's one other player at Geelong that fits that criteria. So I think Jake coming forward also helped that other player. I'm not going to name, but there's one other player there that has exactly the same sort of injury history, re-signed in the same year, currently out of the team. And I think Jake coming forward was a pretty selfless act to reduce the pressure on the other player too, to some degree. And that's been a bit lost. I haven't seen that really reported yet, but I think that was really good by Jake, to be honest, even if it put extra pressure on himself.
There's two more things that I want to touch on, Cody, before we move on, because this could be the whole podcast. It could be a multi-hour podcast. It is a deep and complex story. The first is, what do you think would be an appropriate punishment for Geelong for, I guess, negotiating this in secret, perhaps for the precedent they might have set, a slippery slope perhaps. And the second is, what do we think could be the long-term ramifications of this? Do we actually think could we envision a world where there are more individually negotiated contracts? How would the AFLPA feel about that? Could that be something that we see maybe driving a little bit of a wedge between the AFLPA and some individual players who, I guess, do feel like they're in the situation where their long-term health interests might be superseded by their desire to extend their career at AFL level for a couple of years. So maybe let's take them in order. Do you have in terms of sanctions or penalties for Geelong? There has been a little bit of reporting about that. I think it's mostly been in the realm of large fines being levied, financial sanctions. I've not read anything about sporting sanctions. Do you think that goes far enough?
Personally, I don't. I think a financial sanction will be worn by the club, and potentially they'll get donors to cover it at the back end of it, unless it comes out of, say, football department spend or TPP. Like, I think a raw financial sanction to a club that is, I think, profitable each year, or it can be profitable depending on how they do their line items. Like, no AFL clubs at the wall anymore. That's not a thing. So finding a club, they'll find money somewhere. I don't think it's enough. I don't know because the AFL rules, like the way that they're written, allow unilateral sanctions by the General Counsel or the Commission as they see fit. I think people look to precedent, but there's very little precedent when it comes to the rules. It's a case by case basis thing. I would like to see something real. I don't know if banning them from finals is the right move. I don't know whether docking them places to start them later in finals. That feels even worse to me. Do they start next season on less points? Do they lose draft picks? Do they lose points? I think there's just a variety of options, right?
Maybe they should be prevented from playing finals at their home ground.
Yeah, look, and that's something that there's never been tried with Geelong before. And I think locals would really rally against that. They won't take that lying down. I'm not. The hard thing is, we had no sanction. It wasn't officially in the statement, but it was communicated to journalists that there'd be no sanction. Not to me. I'm not a proper journalist, apparently. Even though we've been breaking news on this podcast. We're going to break some news later on about Brownlow medalist later. Stay listening,
guys. Tuned, yeah.
Stay tuned. But I it's going to be weird when they come out with a sanction, right? After saying to journalists that there's no sanction. And then they're going to come out with the sanction. I reckon there's still going to be some journalists, and there's going to be some clubs who are like, is that it? Right? What do you think there's going to be anything real?
I think, look, I have to be careful of fitting everything to my strong hypothesis, which is that the league is not a particularly competent administrator of the game, and I wrote a polemic article on the blog about a month ago to that effect, and I call the AFL the lucky league. You know, sort of so many of us are prisoners of the fact that we're totally addicted to footy, and almost because of that, perhaps the league kind of gets away with the sort of governance that leaves a lot of people feeling unsatisfied. And yet, it has surprised even me, Cody, the extent to which the AFL seems to have sort of underappreciated how much consternation and anger, and I think maybe on some level fear this story would generate. And I think fear is really part of it. I think there's fear for player welfare. I think a lot of people, even if they're not quite yet at the stage of articulating it publicly, I think a lot of people are really afraid about the future of footy and what concussion-related injuries are going to do to the future of footy. And I think whenever you hear a lament about how the game has gotten soft, or how it's become a little bit over-officious or politically correct or something, I think part of what you should be listening out for is a person expressing a bit of a fear that footy might not really be around in its current form in, well, probably it will be in 20 years, but in 50 years, I think that's a lot harder to say. But yes, sort of locally on this issue, I think the AFL was taken aback by the vehemence of the public response. I think clearly a sanction was not really on its list of priorities, and now it kind of feels as though it's been swayed by this populist sentiment, I suppose, and it will feel as though it has to announce some kind of sanction. I'm totally with you, and I know that conflict drives interesting podcasts, so listeners, I'm sorry. Non-sporting sanctions don't move the needle in terms of club behaviour, especially wealthy clubs that are so good at generating revenue like Geelong. It's just not really going to make a difference. I think if the AFL is of the view, or has been persuaded of the view, that this is a really serious, again, breach or precedent that has been established publicly now in the league, then we have to talk about points penalties. We have to talk about some sort of draft sanctions. Look, sort of rule number one, I guess, of sanctions like this is that it has to act as a deterrent. And in an environment where clubs, as you say, are not financially hard up the same way they were 20 years ago, financial sanctions are just that much less of a threat, and they're that much less of a deterrent. So I think that has to be on the table, but I'm not convinced it is. So let's briefly touch on whether we think that this maybe is the beginning of something, the very beginning, the thin end of maybe a different player contract, an AFL PA, I guess, environment where something like this, which feels abhorrent to us, or to many of us, I suppose, in a way, perhaps this is the beginning of it being normalised, and I don't know, do we think there could be more of these in the future, depending, of course, on the outcome of this saga?
Yeah, I think I mean, that's the environment we live in now. Footballers are well paid enough to be full-time professionals. They paid enough to set up their future lives and careers.
Yep.
Veteran players who are at the fringes of lists where a waiver like this may be necessary are probably on closer to the minimum rather than the maximum salaries paid. Even at the minimum level, that's what, $200,000 a year. That's a fair chunk of change. I think it would be cruel if that's the direction the sport went down, to be perfectly honest. And other sports have hit that line before, and decided to legislate out the dangerous conduct instead of allowing for it and accepting personal risk. When we think about rugby union is a very physical and violent game. Now a high tackle is anything above roughly the sternum or nipple height. When we look at the NFL, they've legislated out blind hits and a bunch of blindside blocking, and they've made the game significantly safer. You look at sport by sport by sport, they're getting safer and safer and safer, right? It's not acceptance of risk. That's not the thing in the Australian legal framework when it comes to workplace rights is really strong on this. Even if it starts to happen, it just takes one player for the scheme to fall down. And I imagine AFL's received legal advice on that. I can't speak to if they have or not. I'm not a lawyer either. I do have a law degree, but I'm not a lawyer.
There you go. Another law reveal.
Yeah. But I'd imagine, right, that I don't want that to be the future. I don't want a player to have to be, look, I've got a $500,000 contract, but I'm not going to be able to talk in 5 years' time if I take it. Like, it just, that feels dirty, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, a couple of years ago, I wrote a piece on the website. It was the week of Jeremy McGovern's forced medical retirement due to concussion. I just wrote this piece. Look, it didn't. I didn't really have an answer to it. I just sort of reflected on this idea of it was called The Ethics of Being a Footy Fan, and I just sort of tried to mull over my own feelings and my own, I guess, ethical misgivings, Cody, about what this great sport that we all love does to so many of the people who play it. Not only at professional level, we've had this discussion before. We've spoken about how horrendous the physical toll, the neurological toll can be on players who just play footy with their mates on Saturdays, you know. So it's tough, and I guess I put those misgivings to one side. I mean, I don't tell myself that, obviously, when I sit down to watch footy every weekend during the season, but that's implicitly what I do. But I think that would be really difficult to do in an environment where I knew that there were players who felt as though, that they essentially could waive some of their legal rights, or in the event of incurring these really awful concussion related injuries because they wanted to keep playing footy. That feels like a really dangerous point to me, and one that I hope we don't get to as ever. I mean, I don't have a solution to any of this. It's really tough. I just think footy is approaching. Well, I mean, maybe it already has approached dozens of forks in the road, and it feels a lot of the time as though we kind of talk around it. The league, clubs, players, journalists, podcasters, they talk about how bad concussion is. They talk about how seriously everyone takes concussion. There's one way to take concussion really seriously, and that's to not play footy. And that's, of course, the idea that no one will countenance.
And can I just come in with a couple of small ones at the end? I think it's particularly dangerous that there's a couple of loud voices in the media landscape that says this is the direction that the game should be going, that there should be an acceptance of risk at the personal level and instead of at the club league level, and that's the direction of the game. I think that's dangerous, and there's a couple of voices. There's one voice in particular that has long been anti-player rights, anti-worker rights, and is taking the game back 50 years, 100 years, right? To a point where we didn't consider these things, where there was players, incurring serious career-ending injuries on the field due to catastrophic injury and lack of player safety awareness. Not going to name names here, but that we can't allow voices like that to be so prominent, that have such extreme views, in my opinion, that are so out of sync with the pub test, with where we're going as a community, where the community standards are for employee safety, right? I just think it's ridiculous. And we keep talking about concussion here. I just want to expand it out just for our listeners. It's not just concussion, it's head acceleration events is one of the terms. It's any contact that creates a head acceleration event. There was a study funded jointly by the AFL and Monash at the start of the year. I used this in an article. I don't think any others have picked it up. They did a study of 500 player matches per sex in 2023. And there's about 12 researchers on it. It's called Head Acceleration Events Measured by Instrument Mouthguards in Elite Australian Football. They found that roughly, I think it's, I'm rereading it again, and it's quite scientific, and I don't want to make a mistake here. There are roughly 8 head acceleration events, 5.7 for men per game versus 3 per game for women, but it's roughly 3.6 an hour for men to 3.1 an hour for women. That's a very high number. That's similar to a back in rugby union. It's a really high number for what we consider maybe not the hardest of physical sports, and it's a number that we need to reduce. The paper looks at how and why. I recommend that everyone look at the paper because it provides a footprint of how we might make the game safer. There's not enough focus on that, on low effort ways to make the game safer, and how we can make sure that we've got a sport to enjoy. We've got athletes that can remember their careers at the end of it and have long and prosperous and joyous lives, rather than talking about things like this.
Really well said. Yeah, really, really poignantly said, Cody. This is a live story. Some of what we spoke about may be obsolete by the time the episode comes out. It's moving very quickly. That does it for this part of 110 Percenters. We will be right back after a quick break.
You're listening to 110 Percenters.
Welcome back to 110 Percenters, the footy podcast with Cody Atkinson and me, Matteo Schlappiksvilla. Jonathan Horn is somewhere in Bali as we speak. Cody, you went to the Expansion Cup game on Sunday at Manuka Oval. Please tell us about it.
Yeah, me and about 5,000 of my footy following colleagues went, and it was I might have a clip here of Bodie Ulan saying it.
Probably, what is it, like 6 or 7 degrees? Oh, jeez. Didn't mean to say that.
And it was a cold, wintry, wet game of footy. It was hard fought, and it was seasons on the line for one team, and it was, I guess, a bit of a test about how resilient the other team was, how much the Gold Coast really wanted it, how much they needed a win. And for the Giants, they needed to win to stay in touch with for finals contention, and they knew it going in. And the Suns just needed a win. They hadn't won since May. If you haven't won since May, man, you need a win.
Pride really was at stake, and it felt like a really cathartic result for the Suns. I mean, 10 straight defeats, and cathartic as well, I'm sure, for Damien Hardwick. Cody, I saw a clip from you that well, I don't know if you were in the rooms exactly, but you were kind of halfway down the tunnel as the Suns players were with the race. Yeah, that's right. As they were walking off the ground, they looked pretty chuffed.
Yeah, you know what? You get to do some really cool things as a footy journalist sometimes. And I think Marnie talked about it being there for their first Essendon AFLW win and that you're allowed to celebrate. I'm not a Suns fan. I don't know Sunny Days too well, but it's hard not to like a team like feeling good. They were yelling finally out. They were slapping around. It was like winning a finals game for them. It felt like that was a weight off their chest. Dimmer was smiling bigger than I've ever seen him on TV. Like, he was like beaming from ear to ear for a couple of minutes. And I got to chat to a couple of players afterwards, and they were just ecstatic. The Expansion Cup's a bit of a joke. No, like, we all know that, right? But it's the coolest trophy in footy because it's tiny. You hold it in your pocket, and the players were posing with it after, and they were smiling still. And even though they know it's a bit of a joke, they're like, it's good, right?
What is because I agree with you, the Expansion Cup trophy is really charming. Is there a trophy awarded specifically to like the player adjudged best on ground? Because I saw a photo of Matt Rowell holding it. Yeah, or is that just coincidence that he was holding it in that photo? It's just coincidence, yeah. Oh, okay, right. So there isn't like a Norm Smith style voting panel for the Expansion Cup MVP. You spoke to Matt Rowell, including, well, and Bodie Hewland. You've already mentioned that, but how was your chat with the Brownlow medalist?
Yeah, it's not every day you get to talk to the reigning Brownlow medalist, and he's had a tough year because he was injured in Origin and had a slow start to the year. After the game, Damien Hardwick said he put up video game numbers, and I think Kingsley said to me that we tried 3 different plans to stop him, and nothing really worked until we put Toby Green on him head-to-head a bit tighter in the fourth. 41 disposals. Disposals don't really matter. 16 tackles, okay, they don't matter.
It was a very cool stat line.
11 score involvements. Oh, that doesn't really matter. 881 meters gained. Oh, that doesn't really matter. It was few games were better played by someone in the wet. The highlight for me. So I'll loop back to the importance of the game for the Suns just quickly. After the game, Hardwick, we talked about the Suns a few times on this podcast, whether they were on the right track or not. We even thought they were still in a shot with finals, I think 6 weeks ago on the pod. That was like, we were late leavers, I think, there. I think everyone was. He said that, I don't know if I've heard a coach say this before.
I feel I haven't had my best year as a coach with regard to bending a little bit my system of how we want to play. So those realisations are very, very important, and these are the things that actually your greatest growth comes from. And so once again, we take stock, we reflect, we build on it, but more importantly, we come through the other end. You know, there's a great line by Metallica that I'm going to butcher where sometimes you think it's, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a freight train coming the other way. That's how it's felt this year. That's the reality of it.
It was really fascinating to hear him talk about that. Like, you don't hear coaches admit failings mid-season very often. And
sorry to interrupt, Cody, but it because I did hear a couple of grabs, or at least read a couple of grabs from Hardwick after the game, and he did seem to be in a really reflective and contemplative mood. And I suppose it is something that comes about fairly rarely where, well, really the worst thing has happened already. The bottom has fallen out of Gold Coast season. They're not going to play finals. My worst take of the season, and there have been several contenders, I guess, for this accolade. It was after their opening round win over Geelong, writing a sort of doomy tweet about how they've got all this academy talent coming through. They're going to be the best or one of the best teams in footy for the rest of the decade, and this is something the AFL has created. Well, it turns out that I was at the very least a little bit early on that one, but Yeah, I suppose Hardwick is excavating some really interesting psychological territory where this bad thing has happened and almost now the pressure is off. And so he can be openly reflective and emotionally transparent and vulnerable in a way that you don't normally associate, I would say, specifically with Hardwick, who usually has quite a tough kind of facade or outer shell, particularly when he talks to the media, who, and again, as we've discussed, he often has a sort of slightly adversarial relationship with the media.
And this is where I pipe in him saying, "They've been really. You've asked too many. You've asked a lot of questions, but they're really good questions. But do you want to give someone else a go?"
Yeah, comment
sorry,
rather than a question. Yeah, and then I talk for 2 minutes. Yep.
Any chance of a question? You have not asked one. You've been very good, by the way. Well done. Very good. Very good.
Yeah. Sorry, Dima. I think he also pointed that it's a time for them to reset for 2027. And I asked both Yuland and Rowell whether you're looking for next year or not. I know a bit of conflicting answers, but Dimmer was pretty clear that he saw the Swans last year have a bad year through the year due to injuries and other issues, and that they reset halfway through the year, 3/4 of the way through the year, and made it about 2026 and not 2025 to some degree. And he's sort of tried to position himself that way. I also chatted to the players about their connection to Hardwick, because there's been those rumours that there's been disquiet and discontent. And I guess after a win, you're likely to see much more continuity amongst a group. And they were really getting around each other. Track was getting around the guys. It's really weird to be in the rooms after a win sometimes in the scrum. And we were just chatting, and the Yulan thing wasn't planned. We just ended up chatting about how good it was to feel a win. And they were happy. I've been in unhappy rooms before, and maybe there is disquiet when they lose. Maybe there's disquiet week to week, but there wasn't after the win. And I think that's important, because that indicates, at least to some degree, that it's rescuable, that there's not a hard line that it'll never get good again. There's like that fundamental, I don't know, hope that next year could be better with better injury luck, with better strategic outlay. Yep. I don't hate the idea of the Suns being good anytime soon, put it that way.
It's not as offensive an idea as, to you, Cody, as it is to some co-hosts of this podcast. I certainly agree with you. You know, the physical development of they're playing such a young side at the moment as well. I think part of this is just about bodies becoming a little bit more prepared and resilient for the rigors of AFL footy. I think that's part of the story here as well. Did you also speak to anyone from the Giants?
Other than Adam Kingsley was pretty blunt after the game, but good. Like, we chatted, and nothing that they could do about Rowell. Close game in the wet. Joey Delania had a good one, but also that was the season done for them. He was pretty accepting that was about it. And I think he was pretty upset, understandably, and it's really hard to negotiate that, chatting to someone who's just had their year cut short.
Well, it feels like all of the accumulated good luck that GWS have had over the past maybe 3 years, and you know the numbers better than I do, Cody, they really have outperformed their expected wins, their expected score, all these nerdy stats that we like to talk about on the pod here. They've been a thrilling team, but they've also been a real sort of seat of the pants footy side. It really feels like all of those chickens have come home to roost. It's been a really brutal regression to not only the statistical means, but specifically the regression to the mean with regard to injuries. And clearly it's impossible to talk about the Giants season without talking about the fact that it has been cruelled by injuries. Tom Green, of course, Brent Daniels, Finn Callahan isn't playing footy, Sam Taylor has missed so much of the season. These are Jesse Hogan, of course. Yeah, exactly. These are their best players, basically. Darcy Jones hasn't played any footy. Really interested to hear your thoughts, Cody. On I can tell by the way you talk about them and the way you talk about Kingsley, you do have some fondness for the Giants. They are, after all, the closest you have to a local AFL side. Do you think they should take a couple of steps back, maybe try and replenish the list, maybe trade out some of the older guys, go back and reset a little bit?
I don't. I actually think, and it's so close, and it just injury luck, and they had a lot of bad luck statistically this year.
Yep.
The one number that they outperformed pretty radically in the past was opposition set shot percentage. You can like you can't and like expect to set shot because you can't defend a set shot any differently anymore. Yeah, you can just stand on the mark. So if the other team kicks well or kicks poorly, that's not down to you. That's down to them. And they just, for some reason, for 2 years in a row, Adam Kingsley, I don't know, had a witch doctor's spell on opposition goal kickers, but
he glared at them. He glared at them while folding his arms.
Yeah, he just did some muscle bicep curls. I know the language of the weightlifter. There's enough talent there. Like the one thing coaches talk about week to week is like the best teams in the league and the worst teams in the league are closer than ever before. I don't think the Giants are dramatically out of that mix. I don't think they were ever in that top tier. Personally, yep. I didn't have them in that top tier regardless. But I think this is a bit low. The one thing that I wanted to skate around, but is real for both the Suns and the Giants, that there is some incentive to lose the next couple of weeks if they can. For the Giants, if they finish in fifth last, they will get that priority pick or whatever the bonus pick. That
additional beginning of second round pick, I think it is, yes.
Which will help match. That means they might be able to get a bid before their young academy kid and
Matthews.
And
yep.
Ethan Matthews, who's great, and be able to match him with that second rounder and other stuff. So that's a real priority for them. For the Suns, if they do lose Ben King, hypothetically, as a free agent, the higher their pick, even though they don't hold it, they'll get a higher band one compo pick. So both clubs have that weird incentive to maybe not lose. Oddly enough, I think the Suns want to win more. The Giants are just sort of out of guys to some degree.
Yeah, I think, not that I really have any insight into Damien Hardwick beyond, I guess, what sort of the media depiction, the sort of public depiction of him is. I think he's just a guy who hates losing, and it seems reasonably clear to me, Cody, that Gold Coast problem is not a talent deficit. So I appreciate, of course, that there is a question here of wanting to maximize the value of the potential compensation pick if they do lose Ben King, or at least that optionality, right? Being able to go, well, okay, we'll force the trade from Hawthorn, or we'll take the compensation pick. But I think Hardwick hates to lose, and I think he knows there's enough talent in this team. I mean, he obviously said it. He said 5 minutes after taking the job that, what was it, 80% of the premiership list was already there, and I don't know. Some people on Footy Twitter have been running the numbers. I'm not sure.
One away.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's so interesting. But the talent is there. I think it's just about, it's doing the culture stuff. It's creating that culture of winning. It's making sure that the style is compatible, I guess, with modern footy. And yeah, I think winning is probably a smartest strategic choice for them in the last 2 games.
I put them. Sometimes I try to fit in weird stuff into my ABC pieces each week. So apologies to my editors at the ABC. I fit like 3 different ones in last week, and 2 of them got cut. But the one that got left was, according to Canadian philosopher Shorzy, there's some value.
I did enjoy that one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not that they don't love to win; it's that they don't hate to lose. And Hardwick is the embodiment of hating to lose, and you can see it's just tortured him. I reckon it was a fascinating game to watch, given that it was so miserable. It was such wet weather footy that we're not exposed to at grounds like Marvel, most grounds around the country. It was so unique to some degree. We've had wet games, but this one was it was miserable, man. I can't describe to you how miserable the conditions were. And the slapping of bodies, the wet bodies, the cold frozen wet bodies. Like when you're that close to the action.
Like fish slapping against each other.
Yeah, Sean Lawson of the ABC said it was like wet steaks, like bloody steaks, just like...
How visceral, yeah.
Yeah, bone-crunching type stuff. And it kind of showed resilience for the Suns that they fought, and for the Giants to hang with them as long as they could with such a depleted list was also quite promising. I think I've got one more tidbit for you, but I'm going to let you ask me the question.
The highlight, perhaps, of your interview with the reigning Brownlow medalist? Is that the tidbit you're referring to?
Yeah, it is. I talked to a lot of interesting people at the game. I talked to the Chief Minister of the ACT. Hi, Andrew, if you're a listener. Hats off to you. Dave Matthews, outgoing president of the Giants, didn't want to chat, but hi, Dave. I did talk to the reigning Brownlow medalist, Matt Rowell, after the game. Little birdie at the Suns told me he was an avid reader. Hopefully I've got a clip here cut up of him talking about his favourite books.
Second, I heard you're an avid reader. Count of Monte Cristo this week. What's your best book you've read this year?
Well, I've got to say I'm halfway through the Count of Monte Cristo, and it's a classic, and I think it's a classic for a reason. It could be up there with one of my favourite books.
What are your favourite books?
I read quite a range. I read Moby Dick last year. That was another classic. That was okay.
It's a hard read.
It was a hard read. I wanted to challenge myself a bit, and so I enjoyed moments of it, but it was a bit of a tough one. The Beach.
Beach?
Yeah, The Beach, the book. I read that. I read that this year as well. That was a good one.
Yeah, sick.
Yeah.
His favourite book is The Beach. Have you read The Beach, Matteo?
I've not read The Beach, but I know who wrote it, and I know that it's a classic of post-war Australian fiction. It's sort of apocalyptic story, if I remember correctly, set in Melbourne, I believe. So good on you, Matt, for your literary taste. Matt Rowell.
I think he gets a lot of crap for some of the stuff he does, like eating grass and meditating before the game. But I reckon he's one of the better thinkers around football, and the notebook that he used to take around when he had the ACL injury.
That was great. I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
He thinks, I reckon, about footy and how he can play footy and maximise his impact more than most. And I think his reading habits, when he was injured with on recovery of the ACL, I'm pretty sure he did a virtual climb of Everest on Zwift with Stewie Dew and a couple of his other teammates.
I remember that from the doco, yes.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to see his development as a young man into being one of the best players in the game. And I reckon it's easy to make fun of the guy who thinks a bit differently and is a bit more thoughtful, but I've got a lot of time for Matty Rowell.
Yeah, no, I agree. He contains multitudes. I wonder if he has a secret Goodreads account. Thanks very much, Cody. It was great to hear about your day out at Manuka. It sounded like a ripping time, actually. I'd have loved to have been there. And been sort of inside the inner circle. So fascinating to be in the rooms of a winning footy side, particularly when it was their first win for, 3 months. We're going to be right back with more 110 percenters.
You're listening to 110 percenters.
Welcome back to 110 Percenters, the footy podcast. It is time, listeners, for From the Hip, our rapid fire question segment.
From the hip.
One host asks, and, one or maybe both hosts answer. We'll see. Cody, the first question is yours.
Thanks, Matteo. Matteo, Taylor Walker announced his retirement yesterday. Give us your thoughts on his career.
Taylor Walker was a really, really great footy player, Cody, and I think he was, and that's probably not the place some listeners would start, and I want to get to that because regular listeners, of course, know that I'm an Adelaide fan. So my feelings about Taylor Walker are sort of difficult to confine to a sentence. But I do want to start about what he did on the footy field. I do want to start with what he did on the footy field. He was a really, really unique player. I think he was a playmaker in the body of a very, very slightly undersized key forward. He was so... I'm not sure there's ever been such a big discrepancy between a player's on-field IQ and I guess... maybe the perception of them off the field in some way. Walker had a really... People talk about the skills, the set shot technique, the field kicking from both sides. And that was special, and I think that's worth celebrating. And in terms of purity of technique, repeatability of technique, I think they deserve to be remembered as truly world-class skills in the game. I think his innate understanding of space on the footy field is really, really special. And I think you're talking about a guy who, particularly after his ACL injury, didn't boast particularly special athletic gifts, I would say. I mean, kind of physical gifts. He was never quick, and by the end, he's pretty much treacle slow. You can sort of see that whenever he had to do some off-ball running and defensive chasing and stuff like that. But his ability to manufacture little bits of space, his ability to, his vertical spacing up the field and his ability to create vertical spacing and find space between defensive lines, kick to the right places, receive the ball in the right spaces, was always really special, I thought. I think that his career rejuvenation after COVID and after, of course, the racism incident in 2021, it was really remarkable, I think, the way that he rebounded on the field, to, of course, have that All-Australian season in 2023, having made the squad several times but never the final team. He's a really significant figure in Adelaide Football Club history, in Broken Hill footy, and in South Australian footy, I guess, more broadly. I think there'll be people who maybe use this as a I don't know, sort of a negative thing, perhaps. I think there are very few players in the AFL who mean more to their club supporters than Taylor Walker, and I think part of that was that there was, of course, this really nasty and unpleasant and unfortunate. There was the racism saga, and the fallout from that, I think, created for many Adelaide supporters, it created a bit of a siege mentality, and so they sided with their guy against other people, I guess. But I watched Walker's retirement speech that he gave to his wife and the Adelaide coaches and the Adelaide players when he made the announcement on Monday. And the bit that got me was when he spoke about being there when Phil Walsh was killed, and he just spoke really briefly but really movingly, I thought, about what they could have done together, and I guess the regret that he feels about that, and what never was. And he was the captain of the club at that time. That was just such an enormously difficult time for the footy club. Patrick Dangerfield left the club not long after Phil Walsh's death, and I think there are a lot of Adelaide fans, most Adelaide fans, and you can condemn them if you like. I won't, challenge you or challenge your right to feel that way. That whatever that means was superseded by what Taylor Walker did. But I think his leadership of the club during this extraordinarily difficult time means a lot of people who care about the Adelaide Footy Club. So I think Taylor Walker was a great player. I think he did a really, really bad and stupid thing. And has he paid enough for it? That's not for me to say, I suppose. Cody, maybe that's a cop-out. I don't know. A very good footy player. I don't know if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I got a lot of thoughts about Taylor Walker, and he's actually a guy that I've probably written about as much as any other. Over the years, he's leitmotif about how footy's changed and how your key forward has changed. Him and Franklin are tied together as the two people that shepherded in the long bomb, or re-brought the long bomb in, and the ability for a key position forward to float higher up and be that distributor as well as the target. I think a lot's going to be said by people with far clearer insight about the incident, the slur, and the apology, and whether he's repented. I'm not the right person for that. You're right that he's about as rabidly supported as any other player in the league. I think it's remarkable for a few different reasons, his career. He's going to end up about the 25th highest goal kicker of all time when all things are said and done in his career. Probably puts him on the path to the Hall of Fame, which might surprise some, but he'll probably make it from where he is. There's only one goal kicker.
Yeah, right.
You were going to say?
I don't think he'll make it. I don't think he's got quite enough accolades. No flags, no BNFs, only one All-Australian. So it's interesting to hear you say that.
I think he's in with a shout, and I think it's going to anchor a lot of people. I think he's got a better case than, say, a Sav Rocker, to be perfectly frank.
Whoa.
His best career year was probably when he was 33, which is remarkable. I think he actually changed the way that the game is played as a key position forward a bit, and he deserves a bit more credit for that than he's given. And I think if you look at what a key position forward did to how he played, he actually added more value than most for that and other reasons. Tighten a Broken Hill footy. I think some won't miss him. A lot won't miss him. I think 1/18 of the league's fans will miss him deeply, and quite a few neutrals who maybe don't worry too much about the off-field stuff as well. For better or worse, I think his career is one that we're going to look back on, and a lot of players are flawed. We've talked about this in previous weeks, but yeah, I think it's worthy of just taking a notice of him and what he does and what he means to this Adelaide team. Particularly now, he still means a lot to this Adelaide team right now.
Yeah, he does, and I think it's going to have a non-trivial sort of impact on the remainder of their season. I think the emotional impact, I think, of his retirement announcement.
Yeah. So again, I'm not. Don't be racist is a really easy thing to say, and maybe the apology also was a bit tone deaf. But I think by and large, his career won't be one regrettable incident that he's apologised for. I don't think he's been racist on multiple occasions, and I think he's continued to atone for that. But I'm not the right judge of that. I'm not Indigenous, and I'm not probably the right determiner there. So I will defer on that one. But nonetheless, the on-the-field footy stuff, I think Tex Walker is probably underappreciated, and we've only got a handful of games left.
Cody, next question is mine. The opening game of the AFLW season, it was a great spectacle, played in front of a really healthy crowd at Marvel Stadium. Do you think it vindicates the doubleheader concept and maybe even the idea of playing W games at bigger stadia?
Yeah, and this would have been a great question. We were going to have Marnes on this week, but Marnes is unfortunately a bit sick, so get better, Marnes, if you're listening.
Please.
Of all the people
feel better, Marnes.
that I think might be listening, you are the best shot that I've got here. Pablo's not listening, man.
Dave Matthews is possibly not listening.
Andrew Barr's not listening, but Marnes, let's hope you are listening. I hope you get better soon. She wrote a really good yarn on abc.net.au talking about the doubleheader. I didn't go, but I watched some highlights on TV. I watched a bulk of it on TV. And the crowd did build as the game went. So it started. We've written down 2,450 odd turned up.
20,000.
Sorry.
Yep.
My apologies. I did mean 20. unlike Manuka, which might have actually had 2,000. That's a really solid number. Like a lot of double headers, and I go to a few double headers. Being a Canberra Raiders. Going to a lot of Canberra Raiders game, the W often is played in front of the men's, and the crowd builds as it goes through. And it's what I would say a passionate but semi-interested crowd at times. And I think that's sort of the way that doubleheader footy sometimes goes. That if fans come in halfway, they're not fully invested in the entire thing. And I think some of the comments in Marnie's article sort of speak to that. So like for most of the game, there was around 10,000 people there, which is still higher than the Australia-Ireland game, but it's still not what we want to be. The quality of footy was really high. Like, it turns out playing on a proper stadium under good conditions leads to good footy. Who would have thought? So I think that aspect is really positive. I'm still yet to be fully sold on the double header idea. But I'm willing to be convinced. I think some is probably better than none. I think more importantly, I think you can get games in better facilities. That's the lesson here. It's not double headers. It's the league owns Marvel. You could open part of Marvel for that type of thing quite regularly. And if the AFL has to take a financial hit, the AFL has to take a financial hit, right? I think that's the no-brainer. Why not two double-header W games going together? I think there's options there.
Yeah, and if it's a slightly costly signal for the AFL to signal that it cares about the AFLW, well then maybe the AFL has money. I'm on public record, Cody, as saying that I quite like the suburban character of the AFLW, and I think that's actually an asset for it. Maybe not an asset that shows up on the balance sheet necessarily, but I think an asset that helps to create pretty strong bonds with AFLW fans. But I think that the AFLW is also at a little bit of risk of well, risk is maybe not the right word, right? I think we speak about AFLW fans a lot of the time as though they're a little bit different from quote-unquote AFL fans. They're a different kind of footy fan. Demographically, they might be a little bit different. And I think just sort of maybe treating them as a slightly balkanized group can create this idea that, yeah, they are, different. So, look, I think playing at certain suburban grounds, and Gemma Bastiani of AFL.com.au and the ABC, many different hats, made this point when I chatted to her for the piece I published last week, that, look, we don't need to play at every suburban ground, just a few is enough in terms of quality facilities and ultimately quality of footy, right? So I think it's a tough balance, isn't it, right? That connection piece and the nostalgia, I suppose, and the value in the present day of that nostalgia and that slightly more grassroots feel of feeling like you're at this old, dare I say, kind of VFL suburban footy ground, I guess, and what that might mean for the AFLW. But it was a great game, so I'm really interested to see when we have a bigger sample size. And North Melbourne, I believe, are playing a double-headed this weekend coming. Because of course we've only had one AFLW game at the time of recording. There will be more. It's a sort of fragmented first round, so it'll be great to see how that happens and yeah, what the numbers tell us when there are more games at bigger, better stadia.
It feels like they've got momentum for the first time in a few years, though, and I think they've really I'm not sure if it's deliberate. If it is, hats off to them. But it feels like having the sellout international and a pretty big headline number to the first game and a good game, like a really good, aesthetically pleasing game. I like ugly games of footy, like on Manuka on the weekend, but there's a lot of fans that like high-scoring, aesthetically pleasing footy, and that's pretty much what it was. The two W games this year that have been publicly broadcast have been really good. So yeah. I think they've got momentum here. I really want to see the AFL capitalise on this.
Cody, final question of this week's From the Hip is also mine. It seems that Essendon will now delay an announcement on senior coach until next week, or that is at least what's been reported as of Tuesday. What's your read of the situation? It sounds like we're down to a final four, but I know that you have a certain view on how it's going.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of leaks, it feels like, a lot of deliberate media placements. You've got some stuff out there saying Jamie Graham's a great coaching candidate and he'd be up for the job that have been published, which feels like someone's trying to soften the blow a bit. And there's
quotes attributable to Jay Graham or I don't know, someone involved in Essendon who may not be hiring Jay Graham.
And he's long been touted as a future coaching candidate. Murray Davis has also been getting a bit of press. But the James Hird stuff is still loud and clear. The fact that they'd be willing to pay into the football department tax line to support James. Even Tom Morris went with, I think McVeigh had the last interview, which gives him a head start because the last interview isn't like a proper interview. I don't believe that even remotely. But I'm not an expert in that type of stuff. It feels like they're still trying to balance quite a few different things. It feels like it's a surprisingly competitive field, despite what was speculated on at the start of the day. But I would say, you know what? Like, we had the first From the Hip, I think, or the first debate segment of this show was like, should Essendon appoint James Hird? Was that the one that did you argue for James Hird?
I did.
Yeah, do you still back that?
I'm becoming slightly less convinced that is what the Essendon Football Club will choose to do. I thought it was a fait accompli a few weeks ago. I don't think that anymore. But Cody, I also think the Essendon Football Club is not governed by reason.
Yeah. There's a lot of football clubs that aren't based on what has come out in the last few weeks. The last week. I think it's one of those things where football's an irrational love, yeah?
It is an irrational love, exactly. Cody, before we sign off, we both teased that you featured in my dream last night, and then we spoke for about 90 minutes, and thank goodness I just remembered it. So listeners who've hung around for the whole show and who were yelling into their podcast listening device of choice saying, Mateo, don't you dare forget about your dream that featured Cody. So totally family friendly, no explicit tags on this week's episode required. How it went, and Cody, you don't know this. We haven't spoken about this.
I do not know about this.
I dreamt that you were at the post-game press conference at Manuka Oval on Sunday, which of course you actually were, but that instead of interviewing either Damien Hardwick or Adam Kingsley, you interviewed Pat Voss of the Freo Footy Club. And
shout out to Pat, good long-term listener.
Absolutely, shout out to Pat, friend. What his favourite books are. And I don't know if it was in the process of answering a question that he asked you, or if it was just a little sidebar that he inserted before answering a question from another journo, Cody. But a part of my dream was Pat Voss taking a moment to credit you because you had done such a fantastic job of describing his specific player type. And he said, this is again, in my dream, Pat Voss said that you described him as, quote, a small heavy.
A small heavy.
A small heavy.
Man, he's a small heavy.
He kind of is a small heavy.
He is a small heavy. I think that's the title of this episode too. We've gotten all the way to the end and the title comes in, a small heavy. It sounds like a really great psych rock band from the 60s or 70s, like the small heavies. Yeah.
And given that I summoned it in a dream, not a terrible description of his player type. He's certainly not a typical tall, right? He's I guess third tall type, but he's more of a ground level player rather than an aerial threat. Pat Voss, small heavy.
Yeah, I mean that's a great dream, except for my involvement in it. I think replace me with anyone else, Mateo.
But Cody, you were the one who came up with this label. Anyway, how about that for a coda to the show, to this week's episode? It's been a two-seater plane this week, Cody, but I think we've done a pretty good job of flying the plane. Before we go, a couple of recommendations from me. The first one is, again, I've mentioned her just earlier, Gemma Bastiani, who I spoke to for a piece on the 1%ers blog last week. She has come out with her own podcast / Substack called 2%ers, covering all things AFLW. Get around that. And another friend of the pod, Joe Cordy, a contributor, well, sort of the editor, more or less these days, of This Week in Football, which is a wonderful kind of indie footy publication, which you had a big hand in starting, Cody. Joe has also started an AFLW focused Substack called The Lasso. Footy Substacks, they're just everywhere now.
Yeah. I was in the blog spot era, man. Like, I don't even know about the stacks sub themselves. I don't know, man.
What about the Footy Beehive? When are we going to enter the Footy Beehive era, or maybe we'll go full circle back to the Footy Tumblr, the Footy Blogspot era, or something like that?
I think we started HPN started as a Tumblr because we wanted a joke to have something serious on Tumblr, and yeah, we failed.
No, I love it. The OG influence on so many of us. That's all from this week, Cody. Thank you so much. Our hearty thanks to you as well, listeners, hopefully. If you like what you're hearing, please review us on your podcast platform of choice. Yeah, but is it mine, or is it Pat Voss, or is it Pablo Torre?
Chat to each other. We want to hear one review. I want you guys to collaborate to provide the one review. Email it to Mateo, who can be hello@1percenters.net.au, or you can find us on Twitter or Instagram. But again, I want you guys to listen and chat to each other in the comments or DMs and just provide us one opinion. And I want it to blow us away. I want it to be the small heavies of opinions.
You heard it. Until next week, I've been Mateo.
And I've been Cody.
And we're the 110%ers. See you next week.
Or 2/3.